Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Natalie Gochnour, Director of the Kem C Gardner Policy Institute, Bob Bernick, Contributing Editor at Utah Policy, and Frank Pignanelli, Political Commentator and Lobbyist with Foxley and Pignanelli. So glad to have you all with us this evening. Let's jump right in. Frank, we'll start with you because we just had a big event in the state of Utah this past weekend. On Saturday, the state conventions occurred. Republicans and Democrats both met. How was this different than what we have seen in the past, and with what kind of success?
Well, most observers have said it was a great success. First of all these great people who were activists didn't have to give up their Saturday going to some school auditorium and listening to all these speeches. They were able to participate online, which began Thursday afternoon. And of course, you had that ranked voting too. So even though the results came in later, there was a lot of perception that this really is this something that's going to happen in the future, because you were able to get through all the different candidates with the unusual result of some of the major contests of 4 members in the primary. But what really people felt like is, number one, they were able to still participate. Secondly, they were able to look at the videos and the other comments, of course, receive the correspondence from candidates and make the decision. And so overall, both parties did a great job of reaching out to their delegates, having the delegates participate. Tremendous participation. Republicans over 90%, Democrats 85%. And remember, these delegates were chosen in 2018. And yes, there were some replacements made. So the enthusiasm to participate by this, from people who were elected 2 years ago, is an amazing attribute to this new process.
That's true, except that we saw the same results that we've seen in other elections, and that is that especially on the Republican side, the the delegates are a lot more conservative than the rank and file, and we see this, of course, in our polling that we do at Utah Policy, and also with the Hinckley does polling also. And so we had people come out of the convention, and they didn't reflect the polling that we've done before the delegates got their chance to talk. So to me, it means once again that while the convention system, this worked really well, and congrats to the people who ran the conventions, but this tells me once again that the delegates do not reflect at all the general voting population of the Republican Party.
That may be true. Look at the polling, but what's interesting, Bob, and what the Republicans did, which I thought was really fascinating, is that you could go online and look what happened with the ranked voting. I mean, it never really changed. And secondly, some people that you thought were going to be in second or third place, it just didn't happen. But that's always been the case. That the delegates usually been a little bit more extreme. I think if they keep doing this, and perhaps having precinct caucuses chosen on the different areas either by Facebook or Zoom, whatever, that could change. But I'm just looking at the mechanics of it. And here we're in the middle of a pandemic. You had great participation by people, again, who were chosen 2 years ago on both parties. So to me, having that level of participation, and I'm going to say this, I believe that the delegate convention system was on life support. Using this technology may give them, I think, a new breath of life, because you can expand it to allow more people to participate, to deal with the issue that you talked about. I think that may be an option in years to come.
Natalie, let's ask about a couple of the fundamentals of this event, because it has been, at least traditionally, the case that the candidates coming out of these conventions, particularly the Republican, are a little more conservative than the candidates that sometimes win in the primaries and in the general. In this case, I just wanted your thoughts about this ranked choice voting, because that definitely did have an impact on the candidates that came out. And to that point, Spencer Cox did come out as number 1. I'm not sure that he was maybe the most conservative of the candidates.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as Bob was talking, that if I'm not mistaken, Spencer Cox got 30% on the first round balloting, and he's widely viewed as a moderate. I know that's not exactly how he's campaigning, but he's shown over time that he has some very middle of the road points of view, and yet he won the election hands down at the convention.
Mm-hmm. Now, Bob, I enjoyed your story about this because underlying some of this is whether or not delegates are really upset at candidates who decide to get signatures, rather than sort of being pure about it, just going through the convention. Spencer Cox did get signatures. Greg Hughes did not. Talk about how that played out overall.
Well, it shows that Cox had a lot of support in the convention, which is kind of different, isn't it, than we've seen in the past. Hughes did not get signatures, and he came in second place. But you look at Huntsman. Look at John Huntsman. He finished. Yeah. He only got 400 votes in the first round and or the second round, whatever it was, and he got knocked out. And John Swallow, we all know who John Swallow is. John Swallow got 800 votes. So you look at that mix, and you have to ask what the heck is going on with some of these delegates.
Well, and keep in mind that Governor Huntsman had the endorsement of Senator Lee.
Yes.
And he played prominently in his video, his basically convention speech. So for John Huntsman to not do well was very we don't know what we've exactly got in these conventions right now.
But Natalie, Lieutenant Governor needs to send you a big flower bouquet of gratitude, because let's be honest, that the Lieutenant Governor and the Herbert administration, especially under your guidance, has done a great job of leading the state. And I think Lieutenant Governor Cox has benefited from that, and has benefited from the plan that you helped develop. So that must have played for many of these delegates in their considerations of who to cast a vote for at the convention.
Yeah, I think it did. You're right, Frank. But I also think that delegates like to punish people. And we've seen this time and time again. They punished Bob Bennett. They punished Olene Walker. They like to punish people. And they punished John Huntsman. And why? Because he quit his job to go work for the Obama administration. And that is just poison to a lot of arch-conservative Republicans.
So, Bob, why did they not punish Spencer Cox for the signatures?
Well, I think Frank's right. I think that he's been out there especially with the coronavirus. I think they were looking past that. And so they like the stuff that he's doing with the coronavirus so far. And that's a double-edged sword. I think we're going to be fine until the primary in June. But if things turn really bad with the coronavirus and how they've run things, then that can really hurt him, I think.
One more point on this governor's race, Frank. I think it's interesting because this was not Deidre Henderson. She's the lieutenant governor candidate to Spencer Cox. This was not her first go around. It was not as good for her last time, but it certainly seemed to help to have her on the ticket this time.
Well, I do too, for a couple of reasons. One is Deidre, she was a great state senator, but also she does have a connection with the conservative element. And because she's represented a big chunk of Utah County for a long time, she is very popular in Utah County. So I think that did help Lieutenant Governor Cox in his bid for that.
Okay.
I'll also say, Jason, that I thought that Spencer Cox's speech was the best of the candidates. I thought he did a really fine job on his convention video.
Natalie, as a student of politics, I know you watch these campaigns over time too. I'm curious how you look at this primary shaping up when it looks like we have truly a full menu of opportunities from the conservative to the moderate. How do these candidates really approach the population when there really are true different perspectives?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, Kem Gardner, and I'm obviously run an institute that's named after him, but I had nothing to do with his op-ed in the Salt Lake Tribune, encouraging people to register as Republicans because the real decision is going to be made June 30th in the Republican primary for the governor's race. But we have a lot of incredible choices. And I will say I have a few Democrats in my family that have done just what Kem encouraged. And so it's going to be interesting, but you're basically going to see Hughes and Wright be on the conservative side, and you'll see Huntsman and Cox split the moderate vote. Unless I'm mistaken, that's how I see it shaping up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I don't think that I'm going out on a limb here, but I don't really think that this is a winner take all in the primary. We do not have a runoff. And so we've got 4 candidates, maybe 5, if Garbett can somehow find a way into this. I don't know if she can, but I think that you're going to see, I don't think Hughes can get there because I don't think there's enough arch conservatives to put him over the top. This is going to be, I still think it's going to be between Cox and Huntsman.
The only thing I would, you're probably right, Bob. But the only thing is, remember, you got 4 good candidates. I mean, they are good candidates. They're funded, they're articulate, and you're going to need only somewhere between 27-30% possibly to win this thing. And so maybe it's a Hughes or maybe it's a Huntsman. But what's interesting, usually to win a primary, you've got to put together your base plus reach out to, depending on where you're coming from. And here they can really focus on their base, get their base excited, and do a little bit of reach out. So the dynamics on a 4-way primary, which is happening not just in the governor's race, but 2 congressional races, really offers up some interesting dynamics of how these candidates approach it, because it's unlike anything that we've seen in the state before.
Well, and let's remind ourselves that it's happening during a time of economic and public health emergency. So really unprecedented.
Let's follow that thread that Frank brought up about the CD districts for our congressional candidates, because those are up. We have some pretty good open races right now. Particularly, let's talk about CD1. Frank, how is that one shaping up? Because it's wide open. Rob Bishop stepping down. Several good candidates.
Yes, you have several good candidates, and you have several of them have held elected positions that they're well known in northern Utah. So to me, this truly is going to be, and as Natalie commented, it's going to be, you have these candidates, all of them they're doing okay funding, not doing great funding, and the RCCC is just waiting to see who comes out. So they're really going to have to figure out how to do retail politics during a pandemic. And I think you're going to see them really try to focus on their base and adding a little bit of point just so they can get to that 28% threshold to get through. So they're not going to be at the center of attention as perhaps the gubernatorial candidates will be. So they're really going to figure out retail politics during a pandemic.
Yes, and two of those who lead in the polls, or who kind of Bob Stevenson and Katie DeWitt, they actually were knocked out in the convention, but they got signatures. And so the more conservative guys, like we talked about, Kerry Gibson and Blake Moore, they came out of the convention.
The other district, of course, Congressional District 2, Chris Stewart, 71% of the vote, no primary. Congressional District 3, John Curtis, 65%, no primary for him on the Democratic side. And both of them have one Democratic challenger as well. Kel Weston in the CD2, Devin Thorpe in CD3. So those races are kind of set with who the candidates are going to be, but that is definitely not the case with Congressional District 4. So interesting in this particular race going into this thing. Bob, I know you were watching this one very closely. Let's start with the candidates there that came out, because these are the more conservative ends of the spectrum coming from the Republicans.
Yeah, Kim Coleman, a state legislator, and Burgess Owens, a former NFL football player who's been on a lot of talk radio, conservative TV kind of stuff. They come out, and then they're out with Jay McFarland and Trent Christensen, who I believe both of those guys got signatures. Same scenario. So the conservatives came out of the convention. The other guys, more mainstream, if you want to call them that, they came out on signatures. So it's the same dynamics. And Frank's right. I don't know how they're going to reach all these people, because they're down ballot from the governor's race, and it's going to be tough. Money's always hard. Frank's run some primary races, and it's always tough to get money in a primary, and so this will be an interesting dynamic. And of course, then down in the District 4, whoever comes out and wins that, they got to face Ben McAdams, who's looking pretty good in the polls.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, Natalie, because it is true. Ben McAdams in his convention received 89% of the vote, very popular with Democrats. And pretty good name ID in that district as well. But this has turned out historically to be a very competitive district. How do these other candidates that we just went through, Bob gave the names, how are they going to make a case against Ben McAdams, who's in pretty good shape right now?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult for them, largely because people don't know who they are. I mean, if you're inside baseball, you might know Kim Coleman, maybe you know Jay McFarland because you listen to KSL, but for the most part, these are names that people don't know, and they can't get in front of people. Normally they'd be going to, breakfast events, and they'd be in group settings, but in a pandemic like this, they're stuck with mail and online kinds of things. I know Trent Christensen fairly well. Trent gives a roaring speech but he's not going to have a chance to be giving speeches in front of people. So I think this all advantages Congressman McAdams.
Okay, Frank, talk about how this works. You teach campaign management classes. We love that you do that even up here with Hinckley at the University of Utah. Help us understand how these candidates will do this, because there is nothing traditional about how they have to campaign. And these candidates need a lot of name ID, and they're going to need a lot of money, and maybe even they need to spend a little time not just going after each other.
Right. They're going to be very creative. And the reason why is because, as Natalie pointed, some of them are very good. And even the governor's going to figure this out too, because oftentimes you have these massive debates and these get-togethers. That won't be happening. Now, it may be loosened up where you have groups of 20. I could see them doing a lot of cottage meetings, but I do think they're going to have to figure out some social media strategies. Yeah, because that might be the best way to get their message across, and they're going to have to figure out how they can target their specific voters. They're going to do some canvassing, I think, through electronic means to do so, and hit the messages that are correct. Now, that sounds like normal campaigning, but usually there are things that you could do, because it's one of the things to do is get people to vote is having that personal contact. That's going to be so difficult. So they're going to have to figure out how to do that, especially through social media, because the options for the large gatherings are going to be limited. The other thing they're going to have to do is be very strategic about how they use social media, perhaps the geofencing and things like that, so that they only really are focusing their efforts on getting out the vote where their base is. Because again, they're not going to need 51%. They're going to need somewhere around 25 to 30%, which is lower numbers, but they're going to have to really get their base energized. The other thing that's going to happen too is whoever comes out, when they're running it, Ben McAdams, that's by some observers thought he could be vulnerable if there was a huge Trump wave. Because of the pandemic and the economy, there may not be any help for the top of the ticket. So whatever they do to get through the primary, they're going to figure out then how they take on Ben McAdams, who's going to be well financed and has done a great job of talking about, his being infected with COVID and things like that. So especially the 4th district, they're going to have to figure out both the primary and general election strategy without a lot of help, I think, from the top of the ticket.
Mm-hmm. Bob, before we leave CD4, I just want your thoughts about this, and it's to the great point that Frank just made. In the poll that the Hinckley Institute just did with Desert News, we asked about President Trump just in CD4, and President Trump was at 52%, which is about 5 points lower than he is in the rest of the state of Utah. Please, what are your thoughts about the Trump factor in that race and how it impacts Ben McAdams?
Yes, whoever comes out of the primary for the Republican, I don't know if that person wants to have Trump come and campaign. Now I'm talking about the general. Okay, certainly you can tie yourself to him a little bit better among your Republican supporters, but I think he's a liability in the 4th district, and especially among women. We've seen this 10, 12, 15 point difference between women and men and their feelings about Trump. And so this is, I don't think you want to play up to him hardly at all when you get into the general election against McAdams. McAdams is not going to talk about any Democrats, of course. He's just going to talk about himself, same playbook as Jim Matheson did for so many years. It worked out as success. It's a tough district. It still leans Republican, but McAdams defeated an incumbent 2 years ago, and I think that he has got to look like a pretty good chance right now. And maybe the best thing that happened to him, you say, is he caught the virus, because that put him in a very good light. Now that's a long ways away. The election's a long ways away. A lot can happen, as we know.
Speaking of this virus, because we have to talk about COVID-19, because there's an issue for this particular kind of outcome on every single political race that's happening. And Natalie, you have been leading the charge for the state of Utah on how it opens, how we recover. And of course, elected officials are all coming to you because in a very real sense, some of the races do depend on what happens here. I think we just got unemployment numbers today in the state. Maybe you can talk about that and then talk to us about the opening up process for the state of Utah.
Sure. Well, so this is what we think of as a public health crisis, but it's also an economic crisis. And we have now, in the last 50 days, shed as many jobs as we created in the last 3 years in the Utah economy as a nation-leading economy. That shows you how severe the economic hit is. We now have about 137,000 Utahns in the unemployment lines. It's about 8% of our workforce. Nationally, that number, by the way, is 15%. So we're doing far better than the nation, but it's a very serious time for our economy. my background's economics, so I can go on about this for a long time, but I'll just say 2 more points. I think April will be the worst month of this crisis. So we're through the worst. We've hit the apex, if you will. And then we do have a plan as a state. It's Utah Leads Together. Governor Herbert has instructed that we're moving into what we call the orange health guidance phase, which means a gradual opening up of the Utah economy. You don't do it all at once like a light switch, but you do it more like a dimmer or a brightener, I like to say. So under the orange scenario, we want you to continue to work from home if you're able. But if you do go to work, we want you to be wearing face coverings and maintain a 6-foot distance. You can, be in groups of up to 20. We still want you to limit out-of-state travel. And as we do this, there'll just be this gradual turning up of economic activity as we also watch the public health measures to make sure that we're doing a proper balance of economic health and public health.
How are you monitoring that, Natalie? Where are the kind of the inflection points where you start being able to say, yeah, this is working, we can start phasing this up, or maybe even go down from orange down to a lower level?
Yeah, the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, under the leadership of Chris Cox, has an intelligence portal. It's multifaceted in what they're following. It's not just who tests positive or the ICU utilization rate, but also societal measures and economic measures. And so they've got a commission and they've got a dashboard, and they are very data driven in their decisions.
Very good. One of the interesting issues that has been coming up has been about the anti-malarial drugs. That seems to be a big controversy. I mean, some people calling this Pillgate here. Elected officials are trying to do everything they can to try to help. This is one that seems to have backfired a bit.
Yeah, because as General Burton said, in the fog of war, they made the decision. And I think you're going to see in the gubernatorial campaign, because of the position that Lieutenant Governor Cox has, asking questions about that. And I think there's been some other contracts too that can become under scrutiny. And so you have to weigh, they were doing the best they could under a tough situation, or do they apply enough scrutiny? But other things that come to light too, the banjo contract, the Attorney General's office. So you're going to start seeing more and more of that, because what's going to happen, especially with the gubernatorial candidates, they're going to say, well, yeah, things are great, but we want to ask these questions. The one thing I do want to add is I have the honor to represent a bunch of national and local companies, and I can't tell you how they really are complimentary of what Natalie and the governor and others have done in the plan that they have for the pandemic. And the thing about it is that it's really promoted a lot of Utahns to go out on their own and figure out solutions. And they've done that, especially like Test Utah and things like that. So, well, really a great debt of gratitude. But we should also be proud how our state has actually handled this and why we're coming through it quicker than we thought, but also really on top of a lot of things too. And it really speaks well about our state and the leadership of Natalie and others for doing this, because I deal with this every day with businesses and employers, and they're grateful for what Natalie and others have done.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Frank.
They have a great credit to Natalie as one of the key architects here. And I'm kind of curious, Natalie, to that point, and I want to hear what Bob is hearing on the street about this too, because even Congressman McAdams and other elected officials are now looking at how the water gets to the end of the row. Some of the help comes from the federal government and from the state. How do we make sure it gets to the places where it's going to help us the most?
Well, the reason that we were able early to recognize there was an urgent phase, a stabilization phase, and a recovery phase is that we knew help was on its way. And I have the numbers here. The Paycheck Protection Program has brought $3.7 billion into the state of Utah. That's just a phenomenal amount of aid. And then the direct financial aid, these $1,200 checks that have come, $2.8 billion in aid. I'll let Bob comment on getting it to the end of the row, but what I can say is that the federal government, in a way that surprised us all, really delivered on aid to our state, and there's more on the way.
Yeah, but Utah's basically done it themselves, haven't they? And while the money's coming in, I don't think a lot of people are certainly not praising Trump on how he acted and all of this. And I was surprised. I'd like to get, if we have a couple of moments here, I'd like to get the thoughts of the other folks on the legislature jumping in, because it seemed like Herbert and his folks were doing okay on their side. The legislature calls itself into special session and then puts together a committee that in about 2 days, and the committee decides to go to orange, which is kind of a strange color considering Trump. And so you go to orange, and then you're going to go to yellow. But I mean, the legislature clearly wanted to make a message here that they wanted to take over some of this, and they weren't satisfied with what Herbert taking the leadership on all of this. That's how I see it.
Well, I was going to say, a lot of those legislators have small businesses and they're suffering. So I also think that they're saying, we need to move this. And that's I think part of that legislative reaction.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I feel like I was in sort of the inside circle as a lot of that was going down, and it was all positive, Bob. In other words, legislators have something to offer. And as Frank mentioned, you know, someone like Senator Hemmert is a very savvy small business person. His voice at the table was extremely helpful. And I think the governor in the final analysis welcomed the feedback of an advisory commission to help as we know this. And I'll just make one other point that's really important. So we're turning to orange, and then we might go to yellow, and then we'll get to green. But the whole setup is designed so that we can go back, like let's say we're in green, that we can go back to yellow or back to orange as we live with this virus for the next 12 to 24 months. We don't know what the future brings. And so the real idea here is that we have the ability to fine tune our responses rather than shutting down the entire state, right? Because you can do these dials by geography.
Yeah.
I just want to end with this interesting note, Frank, because it's so interesting, this Deseret News article, and it's talking about Natalie a little bit. She doesn't have to listen to this part, but women are leading this effort in the state of Utah on all efforts of the economy and the response to the pandemic. Talk about that for just a couple seconds.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, I did a column about the people doing the pandemic response, and I could notice that 75%, whether it's Dr. Dunn or it's Natalie or Teresa Foxley, you name it, there's a whole bunch, were women. And so it's interesting that there's a comment that there's not enough women in elected leadership, but it's women who are actually leading us out of this problem into the promised land. And I think it's a cause for examination, saying, you know, while us males do a lot of talking, it's the women who are doing the doing.
Very good. That's got to be the last comment on that. Thank you so much for your insights tonight. So helpful. We're watching these issues very closely. And thank you for watching the Hinckley Report. This show is also available as a podcast on pbsutah.org/Hinckley Report or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week. Please stay safe.